welcome to another Lunch and Learn workshop. I'm Holly Gipson, Senior Product Specialist here at UDA Technologies, and today I'm joined by my colleague Jordan Davis.
Hey everyone, I know many of you are excited to hear from Ian Schaefer. He's actually out of the office on site training clients this week, so he asked me to step in. Some of you might recognize me. I work with Holly and Ian here at UDA Technologies, and I'm really excited to talk with you about estimating today.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan's one of our senior product specialists here on staff. We'll have a lot of great insight to share with us on creating estimates in Construction Online. We'll certainly miss Ian. He's down with some of our general contractors in Florida, so shout out to some of you guys down there. And we really do appreciate all of you for tuning in today and spending your lunchtime with us to learn more about Construction Online.
Yeah, specifically learning today about using the estimating tools inside of Construction Online. Those of you who might not know, UDA Technologies serves over 550,000 construction professionals, and at this point we're helping manage over $70 billion in projects every day. And that, of course, starts with a great estimate, a good estimate, and an accurate estimate. And we're really excited to talk with you today about how you can build better estimates using Construction Online.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a lot of estimates when you think about the dollar value of those projects. And I know that a lot of you are really managing all sorts of things, big and small out there, different types of volume. And so really we want to look at using Construction Online and best practices for building those estimates for different types of jobs, because really it's a universal requirement. No matter the job, you really need to start with an accurate estimate. We want something that's detailed. We want something that's really going to serve you and your team well as you go throughout the job. But we also want it to be fast and easy for you to be able to create that. So we'll look at best practices for putting together and structuring your estimate, and also some really great time-saving tips and tools that we've built in to make that process easy for you as far as getting that information up and going. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in. We'll spend our lunch hour looking at estimating, and we're really going to start at the very beginning. So what I've done here is log into my Construction Online account, and that will be, of course, your first step as well. And when we look at putting together an estimate, our first requirement is going to be that we need a project. So the first thing you'll want to do is make sure that you've created a project in Construction Online. I'm going to jump into some of my projects here, and we'll take a look at the different ways that we could actually create an estimate for that job. So I've chosen my Summit Phase 2 project here, and what we'll do is, now that we've come into this project, we can see from our dashboard, and Construction Online really does a great job of trying to put this information front and center for you so that you can really quickly and easily see which projects have estimates already, if you've already done that for this job. If so, what that dollar value is. We can see from our quick links here that no estimate has been created for this project yet, so we can actually go right into create the estimate from that link. That's going to bring us into our financial section, and of course the estimate's going to be the core of that section for us.
Yeah, so you can see we have a couple of options right off the bat for creating an estimate. Most of you will probably be familiar with creating a blank estimate. It's really straightforward. We're going to dive into each of these options here in a few moments, but if you were to pick the blank estimate section, it really would just start out with the different components for putting together the estimates inside of Construction Online. If you had created an estimate template beforehand, if you clicked on Choose Template, you would see a couple of options for picking the right estimate template to use. We'll talk about putting together estimate templates later on in this webinar as well. We also have an option to import an estimate from Excel. Now, it's really easy to do that. We have a template that you can download that will let you match up your existing estimates to what we'll need to bring it into Construction Online. It's really straightforward. We'll be passing out, or we can send out the estimate template later on at the conclusion of this webinar. I and our staff here would also be happy to talk with you about formatting your estimates to import. Really, if you are working in Excel, you should import your templates into Construction Online. It will save you so much time and effort. And convert them into templates, and we'll get to that later on as well.
It will, yeah. It's an easy process, really, when you look at your options for creating an estimate. All of these are easy, and for the most part, it really depends on what you want to accomplish here and the format that you already have. I know many of our new users to Construction Online will have some sort of Excel sheet that they're using. You know, it's pretty common that we'll see people moving from an Excel-based system to a unified project management tool like Construction Online. So this is a great way to get a head start on getting that data in. We always are going to recommend that you use templates. For those of you out there who are our ConstructionSuite users as well, you can also publish those estimates from ConstructionSuite right into your Construction Online Estimating. But to give you an idea of kind of the nuts and bolts of putting together an estimate, we're going to go ahead and create a blank one for this project. Just so you can see what that process looks like, because even if you don't have an Excel template to import, I can tell you that one of the things we've worked hard on and that I love about Construction Online Estimating is that it is so easy to use from a data entry standpoint. It's just easy to go in, type in what you need. So super intuitive to use. Now you'll notice when we are creating our blank estimate that we have two different options here. We have our standard estimate and our 5-column estimate. Jordan, talk a little bit about the differences between these types of formats for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we chose the word standard here. There's probably not a standard out there in the construction industry, but we're getting it as close as we possibly can to a standard. For us, when we are talking about a standard estimate, what you'll find is that there is a single cost column inside of the estimate. This allows you to, and later on we'll show what this actually looks like, but it lets you define the different lines in the estimate with their corresponding classifications. Now with a 5-column estimate, what you'll see are multiple cost columns for the different classifications in the estimate. So a column for a material cost, a column for a labor cost, all contained on the same line. Now if you are familiar with using 5-column estimates, typically this is going to be more useful for certain industry segments. Then you definitely want to stick with a 5-column estimate. But what we have found is that for the majority of our customers and our current Construction Online users, that the standard estimate is typically the way to go. It keeps things really straightforward. It's really easy to then connect to accounting software through our accounting integrations later on. For what we're going to be showing off today, the standard estimate is definitely our recommended pathway. So if you're not sure which way to go, take a look at the standard estimates first.
Exactly. Both. You know, a lot of it is a preference as to what you're used to and how you like to put together your estimates. Both kind of have their pluses as far as, or advantages as far as, you know, some of the things that you get out of there. For this, we'll just go ahead and use the standard estimate layout. And so what Jordan means here is that in the standard estimate layout, these lines that we have, each of these are going to be assigned a unique classification. In a 5-column estimate, we would see these classes as column headings moving along. So when we start to put together and structure our estimate, if we're doing this as a blank estimate, a few things that I want to go ahead and bring your attention to before we start filling this out. The first one is that you've got some options here that you'll notice on the top and right hand side of our screen, kind of above and to the right of the estimate. This is where, as we're putting the estimate together, you're going to see these begin to update in real time. So it's a cool thing about working in a platform like Construction Online is that all of your changes, you're able to start seeing how that comes together immediately. So you'll see this estimate breakdown dashboard start to update. We'll see our different costs by class and resource begin to update here, how this is going to break down by category. So these are just really handy tools that you'll see, you know, kind of as you're putting together the estimate. One of the other things that we've done in Construction Online Estimating is make sure that, again, we want it to be easy to use, and so part of that is making sure we have as much space as we can. So I'm going to go ahead and select this little icon here. This just means that we have a full screen mode available for you, which means that we can now use up our entire screen to put together our estimate, have a little bit more visibility on what we're working on. You'll also notice that with the estimate, as we begin to add information and organize the information here, you have this really handy toolbar. This is great for allowing you to insert or move things around in the estimate, turn different views on and off, make some edits. So this is a great kind of tool to use for that, as well as quick links to some of your exports and reports. So keep that in mind as you're working through the estimate. Now, building our estimate itself is going to be actually really easy. So you'll notice that when we create a blank one, we do go ahead and give you a couple of placeholders here. So we have our first couple of categories listed. And really, to start building this, we're just going to start clicking on these items and entering the information that we want. So we'll say maybe our first one is going to be planning, and then our second category is going to be foundation. Now, once we've got those categories defined, if we need to add new ones, we can just, again, a simple click is going to allow you to do that. And you can already see how quickly I've begun to build out the structure for my estimate. So if you were creating one from scratch, you're going to go through and add those subcategories here, and then you're going to categories, pardon me, and then you're just going to come in and flesh out these subcategory lines underneath each of these, which is where we would start to build details for the components that go into that planning category. So maybe here you would have your design services. Usually we'll see in planning things like permits, so you would start to just list those out. If you want to be a little more detailed here, you could list out the individual permits. So again, that's going to be up to you, but you will just really start to fill in the details that apply to these categories. And then also for each of these lines, we would come through and begin to look at some of the other components within these columns to really fill out the detail of those estimate lines. Now we have a great question coming in here. So one of our users wants to know, if we can have some specific defaults to a standard estimate, such as like a description that's going to populate on each of those, or kind of the way that you would have maybe certain classifications set up. And that's really going to be a great advantage of using those templates. So before we kind of dive through each of these columns, a couple of things to note is, like, let's say that we go ahead and choose different classes for some of these. Maybe we're going to do a foundation labor here, so we'll mark this as a labor item, and we'll enter descriptions for these. Well, once you've built or modified your estimate to really work for you, then what you're able to do is you'll come here, you're just going to select Save as Template, we'll give that a name, and then here we're going to choose what you want to clear out of the estimate. So by default, we're going to save this information for you. If you would like to remove it, you certainly can. So we would want to just leave this as it is. We're going to go ahead and save in the description. Things like your class are going to be saved, so that when you're using this template next time, those defaults are already there. You've saved yourself a ton of time in terms of putting that estimate together. So for that, as we continue, Jordan, I'll let you step through some of these different columns. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over into one of my other estimates, so we can work with an estimate that we did build using a template, and one that has a little bit more information already populated. So here we'll jump into my summit estimate, and I've just used one of my standard 16 division estimate templates. So it's a pretty thorough template that we've got to use here. Jordan, why don't you step through, as we're putting together the estimate here, some of our different modes for initial estimate creation and what those columns look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were working in the advanced estimate view, which really is exactly what it sets out to be. It's a section for you to really flesh out the detail of your estimates. Everything from making sure that the names of your different categories and subcategories are what you need them to be for this specific project, to the descriptions for the items. As we move on through the advanced estimate view, you're going to see things like the quantity and the unit cost columns, which, as a helpful side note, if you actually hover over the columns themselves, they will tell you a little more about what they are intended to contain. That's really, really useful. But you can see in some of our subcategories, we've put together the cost for the actual subcategory by multiplying or just entering in a unit cost and then the actual quantity of these units, which multiplies out to our base cost. You'll also see in some sections, though, that we are not including a quantity. We just entered in a base cost, which then filters backwards into our unit cost of 1. But the general idea for the advanced estimate in this case is that it gives you a lot of detail to work with to really flesh out your estimates. Now, you may have also noticed a few other views like the simple estimate view. For some estimates, which might not require nearly as much detail to flesh out, or maybe you were just trying to put together an initial cost estimation and you're going to come back in and fill some of this information out later on, but you want something down on paper now. The simple estimate view gives you a slimmed down view that doesn't really require as much scrolling back and forth. It really focuses in on things like the actual costs that you're trying to estimate for this project. It gives you a quick reference for any change order amounts, which might come in later just to give you an idea of where you're standing, and then generates out and shows you the total price or the price to your clients or whoever's actually paying for this. So you'll also notice, though, that there are a few other views that we could touch into now or later, but I do want to move back into the advanced estimate view and show off something that our team worked really hard on, and I think that is a really, really useful tool. If you're working in one of these views, say the advanced estimate view, and you need most of these columns enabled, but you don't really want to see the status column, or I think one of the questions that came in was actually asking about turning off the classifications column earlier, because these are already all set. We don't really need these taking up the extra space. Well, we've actually given you an option to do that. So you'll notice there is an icon here which looks like columns, or if you look in the view menu on the toolbar, you'll be able to actually navigate in and customize your specific view for the estimate toolset in the advanced estimate view. So you can actually make each one of these column views your own customized view that you see every time that you're navigating into the estimate.
Yeah, it's one of the feature enhancements that we've done over the last several months that were really in high demand by you guys. We see so many people using ConstructionOnline Estimating on a daily basis, get great feedback from you guys, but that ability to customize was something that so many of you were wanting, and it really kind of goes to each of you have, your own sort of workflow, your own way. So there are going to be those universal best practices, but certainly you want to be able to customize this to you and your business, and that gives you a way to really work in a way that makes sense to you. You can also access that very quickly just by right-clicking on the column headings. Note that ConstructionOnline is a smart software, so once you set this up, it is going to remember what your preferences are when the next time you come back into that view, so you don't have to do this every time, and you can customize those columns for each of the views that you're working in. So if you want to do some customization, you definitely have that option available for you, and can kind of really drill in and look at the things that are going to be the most important to you when you're putting together the estimate. So now that we have kind of our column set as to what we want to see and what we want to do, if we go back to this advanced estimate view, and we'll work out of this for a few moments because it does give us the most amount of information. As we go through, it's important to note that as we're putting the estimate together, and especially, perhaps we're working off a template like we're doing here, you can see that, you've got the ability to come in and now start really filling this information out. So for each of these lines, as we assign that classification, this is going to now be available on reports and on those dashboards that we've seen. So it is worth the extra effort or the investment of time on your part to come in and really note those details, because there's a lot that you can do with it. Of course, for each of these, if we want to kind of fill in as we go, we can do that. You can also right click and edit here if you'd like to get a longer place to maybe put a description, add some notes in, and you'll notice that there are several different types of notes that we can enter for each of these lines. Now, as we're going through, Jordan, I know you touched on the costing. So, like you said, you can do either that lump sum here or a quantity in unit. One thing that's nice is that this is kind of a triangle estimating system or triangle budget system. So it's, kind of unique on ConstructionOnline in the sense that if we give the Construction Online 2 of those values, it will calculate the other one for us. So most typically you're going to give it a quantity and a unit cost. It'll go ahead and calculate the base, but you may give it a base and then a rough unit cost and have it calculate the quantity, or a base and a rough quantity and have it, if whatever two values you give it, it's going to be able to calculate the other one, which can definitely come in handy. As we move across the screen, once we've got our costing down, there's some other information that often, we may want to start to fill out. I'm going to restore my defaults here. So anytime if you come in and play with those columns, you can always come back and restore the defaults anytime you want. But as we go across, then we'll have some additional information that we can track. The first one is our status. This is actually something that you can customize as far as what shows in this dropdown, but our default options are going to allow you to track the difference between items that you're estimating in-house versus those that you have out for bid versus those that you've awarded, which we would mark as firm. Again, you can come back and run reports off of that, so it's great to just track where you're standing there and customize those statuses. Our resource is going to usually reflect, of course, the vendor or subcontractor or maybe even internal resource that we're using. And we can also get a great breakdown of cost by resource. So if we're tagging, say, a specific vendor here, then we'll be able to see in those dashboards how those costs break down by these different resources. And then, of course, for markups, you have a really powerful and flexible way to manage those markups and really get to the final number that you want for that estimate. So we're going to actually, to do that, we're going to go all the way to the bottom of our estimate sheet. And you'll notice that every estimate, kind of no matter how you've put it together, is always going to have the same section here at the bottom. So this is our company overhead and margin section. And this is where we would apply markups, margins, things like maybe a contingency fund that we want to apply to the entire estimate. So you'll notice as you step through these, you can, of course, customize how they're named, what your percentage is. For percent-based markups, we do give you the ability to choose between these two different calculation methods. So you could do an actual profit margin, or if we want to do just a straight markup, that would be our percent of cost. Or you can do a dollar amount, which is what you'll normally see for something like a contingency or maybe another value that you need to apply. So those can be marked here.
It's a really flexible system. I've worked with all sorts of different clients who use this section for tracking things like general amount they have to reserve for paying special taxes based on what region of the planet that they're on. And how their tax code or tax laws apply. This system is really flexible, really strong. If you have any questions at all about using the company overhead and margin section, please let us know. A couple of things to keep in mind when you're using the company overhead and margin section. It does apply on top of any markups that are entered into the subcategory lines as well. So something to consider is that amount will calculate bottom line, which is once all of the calculations in the estimate are done. Now, that's something else to keep in mind, because if you were to, say, create a change order after the fact, after the company overhead and margin is applied, the company overhead and margin does not recalculate in those instances. This is to make sure that you're keeping your change order amounts completely separated from your prior contract agreements and amounts and things like that. Now, of course, there's always specific situations that might come up, and there is a way to add markups into change orders to make sure that you are actually staying profitable when you're adding change orders into the system. But these sorts of questions do come up, and it is important that you know going into the estimating system exactly how those pieces work.
Exactly, and you can really use that to your advantage. So what I see with markup and margin and people really getting to the numbers that they need, because in the end we want the estimate to be accurate. We want it to be a bid that you're going to win, so we don't want to overbid, but you also don't want to shortchange your company on the margins that you deserve or need in order for that job to be a profitable one for you. So when we're using that overhead and margin at the bottom, often I'll see customers come back and really get a feel for maybe certain lines that they really need to apply an additional markup for. So a common scenario is, labor items, especially maybe in-house labor items, are things that you feel like you need to add an additional 2 to 5% on top of what you're already doing for the entire project. You could come back and do that very easily using this markup column here. With this, we do have the ability, again, to do a percent-based markup, a flat dollar amount, or even a dollar amount per unit. So you can, kind of mix and match this to really arrive at the final number that you want for your estimate there. Now, once we put together the estimate, there are going to be a few things that we normally are going to start doing next. So we'll look at some of those next estimate views. I see a lot of great questions coming in as well, so we will kind of get to those as we're going through. If there's a question that relates, we'll definitely make sure to go ahead and jump in with that. One thing before we close out of this screen that I do want to show you guys, one of my personal favorite tools in the estimate, is that under your view menu, you do have the ability to hide these empty sections. So what I like about this is because when I work with clients and we're doing training and getting started, you've probably heard me say it 100 times, use a template. It just makes your life easier. Template out what you can. It really speeds up the process. But if you have a great master template, we really want a way to come through and fill that out using the items that we need. This hide empty sections then allows you a fast way to get rid of the sections you have not used so that they're not in the way. You've got a comprehensive template. You've got a way to hide what you're not using. Best of both worlds. So normally what I would recommend doing is you'll use the template to put the estimate together. Once you've done that, you can hide out those empty sections that you're not using. And moving on from here, there are typically a few things we would start to do. One would be to generate things like our proposals and contracts. So we'll look at that in just a moment. The other thing would be to start doing things like job costing, and that's where some of those additional views that Jordan mentioned earlier will start to come into play. Our advanced estimate view is really designed for when we're putting our estimate together. Our job costing view is going to allow us to start recording and viewing things like our actuals, our committed cost, seeing how that impacts our budget. So we've got adjustments that can be made here in the estimate, change orders that maybe have been added on, and then you can see what you've spent. And that starts to populate these dashboards here so we can see how much of our budget we've used in each category. Or as you've noticed on my Division 1, I've done a terrible job here. I'm 383% into my budget, so that's going to turn red. So I know, listen, this really needs my attention right now. So these additional views are really great for not only putting the estimate together, but continuing to update that so that you've got accurate job costs throughout the project.
Yeah, and these two views become critical in project execution. What I typically find when I work with our clients is that they haven't really had access to this level of information before. And it's really not a burden at all with our systems to actually keep this information up to date. You can see we have some ties into things like QuickBooks Online in this case. We also integrate with other accounting software like QuickBooks Desktop. We weren't really going to touch on those today, but I really wanted to highlight how useful up-to-date job costing and up-to-date invoiced amounts are when you're actually working through project to project. It really helps you prioritize projects that might need your attention, that might need a little bit extra direction from the top down to make sure that you prevent going over budget on other sections for projects. This information lets you make the best decisions with the best information on hand at the time, instead of finding out 3 months later that you went 380% over on your first division. Now, hopefully that doesn't happen to you. Hopefully you don't get anywhere close to a 300% cost overrun. But our system doesn't really care what you would like to happen. It shows you what is actually happening and gives you the information you and your company needs to be successful.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we would always, of course, want to see those coming in under budget, and having that real-time access to that type of information, whether we're importing that through QuickBooks, through your accounting system, or even if you're just manually typing that in here. It's super easy to just go in, type in a number, and record what your actuals are to date. Make sure that way that everyone on your team is able to have access to that information about where they stand for the budget. So it's a great way to communicate that to, project managers and people that really need to be monitoring that to get real-time updates as to where that stands. It's not unusual for me to work with a client who's just getting started that tells me, you know what, I feel pretty good about my estimate, but I really don't know if I made money on that job until maybe the next year, until the year closes out, or until the accountant takes a look at everything. And this is just a much better way for you to keep yourself and your team, informed as to really the health of that project as we're moving along. Some other things in the job costing mode for you guys to note is that in addition to entering those actuals or importing those from QuickBooks, you'll also note this change order cost column. So as we add change orders into the system, those can be tied to these lines on your estimate. So we'll take a look at how that works in a moment, and this is where that would show. We also have an adjustment column, so you can put in an adjustment up or down here. So this is often used in a situation that's not a change order, but maybe you negotiate perhaps a better price on something, or you just want to note that there's been an adjustment kind of different than what you originally estimated. So you can adjust that up or down. That'll factor into your final adjusted cost, and that's what we're really using to job cost off of.
Well, and it helps you preserve your base estimate, which is really critical when you are comparing or reviewing how your project's actually finished out. Some clients that I work with do have the leeway, or they make the choice to edit their original estimates after the fact. Our recommendation, or my recommendation, has typically been to leave it as it stood when you first put it together. That way you know what adjustments you need to make on your next estimate or the estimate that comes after that. So really, if you're changing the base cost once you're finished putting together the estimate, you're going to lose out on so much information that's so valuable to know, or what do we need to change, or what do we need to take into consideration to really hit our targets moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, you really want to have that information. Now, once you have the information, often the next question is, how easy is it to then turn this into perhaps a proposal that we want to hand off to a client, or what kind of reports can we really generate off of this estimate? So one thing you'll notice in ConstructionOnline is that you do have a really robust financial report section. So we'll head over here on our left side. We'll just go ahead and choose financial reports and take a look at some of the reports and things that we can actually generate once we put our estimate together. So here's where you would find the ability to do things like creating an estimate proposal. We would have the ability, if you're entering those job costs, you would have the ability to run some of those job costing reports to see maybe our estimates versus actuals, or an over budget report. For working with maybe vendors, you have the ability to generate reports like your materials list or a request for quotes, so that you can manage the purchasing side of that and really generate those. And you'll notice when you start to go through these that, for example, if we're going to generate a materials list, that I can really do that either for the whole estimate, I can do that for only a couple of my categories here. I can choose what's going to display on that report. So we do give you a lot of options when you're generating those as to how that's going to really show up for you. Now, of course, the most common thing that you're going to want to generate, usually in the very beginning, is going to be that proposal. You have a couple of options here. Jordan, talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see we actually have two different proposal types that you could generate here, and a tiny preview of each. For smaller projects, or projects that perhaps you don't want to go into too much detail on when you're showing a proposal, you could use the simple estimate proposal. You'll notice there's not too many options here. The estimate proposal itself is a more expanded or fleshed out version of the simple estimate proposal. You can see things like the level of detail that you would like to include on the generated proposal. And that's not the price detail. That's actually the detail of the entire report. You can also control the price detail on the proposal as well. So you can show generally what information you'd like to show from a scope perspective, and then also cut the price detail down to just the categories, perhaps. That's a pretty popular option. I've worked with a number of clients who have done that. You'll also see there's a few options for excluding or including different pieces of information on your proposals, specifically things like including items with zero quantities. Perhaps you want to show those as additional sections for consideration, or maybe you just want to mask them like we did when we changed the view to mask all of the unused sections in the estimate. For our purposes, we're going to turn that option off. Showing the dollar markup, you can choose whether or not to include the line item markups that we talked about before. If you leave it set to a separate column, it actually will expose the markup amounts, or you can prorate or build them into the cost on the report. This is similar for the company overhead and margin section as well. You can either show that as a separate section to expose your overhead and profit margin amounts, or you can prorate it throughout the proposal itself. Once you have your options selected, the proposal itself will generate out into its own document and its own tab, and give you an option to preview it before you do anything with it at all. That's the great thing about the system, is that once the report generates out, you can choose at that point if you would like to save it or download the document for your own safekeeping. Later on we can touch into editing the report, but for now, let's jump in and look through what actually came out of our system with our different options.
Yeah, exactly. So, common questions that people will ask me, especially about generating proposals, is, first of all, we want it to look nice so that we can present that to the client. But in most cases, we also have a few questions or concerns. You'll have different types of contracts, of course, with your clients, and that will really determine how transparent we want to be. So when we're creating that proposal, if we kind of go back to the wizard that Jordan was looking at here, in some types of contracts, you do want to be transparent and really show those markups and kind of connect those dots from, a base cost, and show the markup and show every price for every line. In many cases, you really want the client to have a document that's not that granular. Maybe we want them to be able to understand that the scope of the project is comprehensive, and we're going to include and do everything that client needs us to do, but we don't need to maybe break down every single line or show them all of the prices there. So like you'll notice that as we kind of step through, maybe the price detail, we could just do a grand total. Maybe we want to list everything and include everything on our proposal, but maybe we want to do just a grand total at the bottom. Or maybe we'll do a grand total and do a breakdown by class, but not by individual line items, so they could see what's in material versus labor. So there's a couple of different options for you there. And of course, the most common question is going to be, with that overhead and margin calculation, can the client see that? So, if we want to show them how those line items break out, you can prorate that. And you can see how fast and easy it is to generate a proposal. A lot of times when a client will have a question for me about which one is right for them, I usually encourage you guys to just make a couple of different proposals, see what you like better, because it's so fast to create them. You can kind of check those, and you'll notice on this one we've got a nice listing of what's included, but our total is just going to be a grand total here at the bottom. The only thing that's going to show up separately is our allowances, which is going to come from our selection sheet or our selection area. So that's how those are going to link into your estimate, is that anything we put together as a selection is going to show up here in this allowance section. We've got our grand total, so the client can see very easily all the detail that we are providing for them without seeing a price breakdown of each one. You'll find similar options in many of the other reports that you'll generate here, in terms of maybe a summary of our current contract, or things like these RFQs, or even a purchase order document. You'll always have some options as to how much detail we're wanting to show, or how we're filtering that report, so that in the end you've got something you can hand off to your client or your vendor, save those documents in. Now, like Jordan mentioned, once we've generated a report, you are going to have the option to go ahead and share. So we could send that as an email attachment right from this screen. We could save it back to our file system in Construction Online, which I always recommend that you do. Kind of choose which folder we want to, put this in. So we'll go ahead and just drop this into one of our folders, or you can download a hard copy, print that up locally if you want to provide your clients with a paper copy. So a lot of great options for you on the proposal front here. Now we have had some great questions coming in, a couple of great questions coming in about change orders and how those are going to work with our estimate. We also saw that allowance section on our proposal. So the final thing before we jump into our Q&A that we wanted to show you guys today is really just an understanding of how these other tools, how your change order tool, how your selection sheet is going to interact with your estimate and help you, again, get to that final number that you want, do an effective job of managing the project. I'll start with selections, just to give you an idea of how this works. Now, one thing to note is that your selections are going to add to your estimate. So any allowances that you add on your selection sheet will add to the bottom line of your estimate. And it's actually literally at the bottom. If you go back to this estimate sheet here, let's go back to our estimate view. If we go back here, you'll notice at the very bottom of the estimate, in addition to that overhead and margin, we also have this pink section here for our allowances and change orders. So this is where we see all of our allowances or selections that we've given our clients are going to total on this one line. So we'll see the sum total of the allowances we've provided. And then once we click that, we'll be able to go into the detail of the selection sheet where we'll be able to assign and manage the different actual allowance dollar values here. So you'll create this as categories and selections underneath, just like you would on your estimate. The difference here is that when we go and create this, we're going to actually kind of assign, what that allowance amount is going to be. Pardon me, that was on the wrong level there. You guys, we're going to do that on the actual selection level here. And we'll just give this an allowance. So if we go ahead and give them an allowance of, say, $3,000 for these lighting fixtures, and of course, we're focusing primarily on the financial impact of this today and how that's going to relate to the estimate. You've got a ton of other detail that you can fill out in terms of the due date for that particular selection or allowance, the types of choices you want to offer them, if any, and this interacts really beautifully with your client portal. So there's a lot that you're going to be able to do with this selection section. But for purposes of looking at the estimate, we'll assign that dollar value here. And then now that we've saved that, we can see we have a $3,000 allowance for this section. This is going to total up with the allowances I had already entered for a total of $7,000. And this lump sum is what's going to show up on the bottom of my estimate. So both work together flawlessly to give you that final number that you want. And then the other thing we'll look at in terms of how this is going to link in, allowances are normally something we're going to assign when we're putting the estimate together. So the main thing to note here is don't assign them in both places. You'll want to put your allowances on your allowance sheet and your other estimated items on your estimate sheet. But then once we have that contract and are moving along, typically then we're going to be looking at change orders, and you do have a couple of great options as to how those are going to interact with your estimate as well.
Yeah, so when you navigate into the change orders section here, it's really simple to actually add a change order or a proposed change order into the system. But of course, we're focusing on the impact of that change order itself to the estimate. So a couple of things to note. When you're adding in a new change order, as it stands, when you're first putting the change order in, the change order is going to be considered as an unlinked change order. Someone had asked about unlinked change orders earlier on in the webinar, and so I do want to address or at least show where you can find the information for an unlinked change order. Much like the selections, when you add them in, you'll find unlinked change order amounts down here at the bottom of the estimate. And what you'll notice is that none of our change orders, at least as they stand right now, are unlinked. They're really interesting. Typically, unlinked change orders are change orders for different things that have come up on a project that just were not part of the estimate at all whatsoever. But if you remember, when we were working inside of our estimate before, we hid a lot of unused sections. Now, these unused sections could be really useful. They might come up as something to be considered inside of a linked change order. Let's say we weren't expecting to do any site clearing whatsoever, but it turns out that we do have to create a change order for this, and it has to be approved because it's going to cost a bit of money. It's actually really easy to add in a different kind of change order. There's a couple of ways to do this. My favorite way, the easiest way, is just to right-click on the actual subcategory, click on the change orders section, and then add a new change order, build it out, and you can actually link it to the section inside of the estimate. So if you remember when we were looking in the estimate for the change order amount, the CO amount column, that's actually pulling from a linked change order. It's really, really, really simple to do. We can just come in and let's say site clearing is going to be our change order here. We need to go back in and fill in a little information, so we're just going to call this site clearing, just to keep it simple for now. And let's say this is going to cost us an extra, or not us, but it's going to cost about an extra $1,000 to handle. Maybe we'll give this a markup of $250, just to keep it nice and round, and then create and save. And now we've created another linked change order. You'll notice again that the unlinked change orders here at the bottom of the estimate haven't updated, but if we switch back over into our job costing view, for site clearing specifically, we should see a change order cost. But the thing is, the change order hasn't been approved yet, so it's not actually going to update our estimate.
That's
but this
exactly
is where you
right.
would find it.
Yeah, this is where you'll find it. And that's the other thing to kind of note about change orders is that we are looking for that approval process here. So when we create the change order, kind of rest assured that it really is not going to affect or impact your estimate until it's marked as approved. So when we're creating those, you have the option to create it as a draft change order, which means it's really, not even going to be visible in the client portal. We'll set it to pending when we want that to go live for clients. We're going to manage that approval once we receive that, and only once the change order has been approved is it going to now add on to your estimate there. So we'll go ahead and approve. If you'd like, you can go ahead and approve one of our change orders. But you'll notice that once we approve this, and that could be something your client, of course, is doing through their portal as well. But once they go ahead and approve it, now we go back to our estimate. You'll notice that that's where you'll start to see in that change order cost column that we'll start to now see that we've added that $1,000 on. So that's going to be just the $1,000 of our base cost. If we go into our invoicing mode where we're seeing a price, which is what we're charging the client, then we'll see that reflected as a $1,250. So that's where we're going to include the markup there as well.
Really simple, really straightforward. There's a couple of steps that we ran through really quickly. You would not be moving that fast with that change order in real life, or maybe you would, and that would also be nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Wouldn't have to wait for the approval.
Well, and that's the great thing is it's easy to do. You're filling out the form, and again with that option to link or not link, then that gives you really the flexibility again to manage that estimate and the rest of the process in a way that really fits in with the rest of what your company is doing. So. And you can certainly mix and match those. Now, I think that we have about 10 minutes left in our Lunch and Learn session. And first of all, I just want to thank everyone again for spending your lunch hour with us, spending some time to learn about ConstructionOnline Estimating. We've covered the basics so far of course, how to create those estimates, how to really fill in the detail on the estimates, and how we're going to work with that. Before we go into questions, I do want to just circle back around to these dashboards. We've touched on them a couple of times, but now that we've really kind of seen an estimate all the way through, you can start to see that all of this additional information, we've got the job costing, so we looked at that earlier. So this is where we're going to see where we're doing on the budget. These dashboards are, first of all, unique to Construction Online, and they are also really, really useful. The reports and the granular detail is great. but you don't necessarily want to have to do that multiple times per day to get the information you need. So the dashboards are going to be a great way to come in, take a quick look at where you stand. In our estimate modes, we can again get a quick breakdown of what we've estimated as part of our base, how much of that we've built into our overhead and margin, how much of that is an allowance, how much of that is change order, so we can start to see how the estimate breaks down, where maybe in those allowance sections we could probably anticipate that our client may end up going over, or what we've done in change orders, or is any of this impacting the amount of profit or margin that we have built into the job. You'll notice that the section here on the right is again giving us this breakdown, but now that we have more information, I can see that I've got an estimated plus my overhead and margin. I can also see how that breaks down by classification and start to include that on some of my reports. If we wanted to see from a resource standpoint, again, like those vendors, you'll start to see that breakdown. So even as we've added just a little bit of additional detail to the estimate, you can start to see how those dashboards, now start to interact with that, and then all of that is going to roll up into your company overview section. So kind of the last thing I want to show is that these dashboards are not just for the individual job, but once you're using Construction Online to build your estimates, you can always revisit this company overview section here, head over to your financials, and now we'll get a rolled up view of all of our active estimates for our active projects in the job. What is the sum total here? So now I can see all my estimates added together, how much I've done in terms of, again, in-house estimating, how much total overhead and margin I've got, how much total we've done in change orders maybe. We can see on a job by job basis, where do we stand on the budget for each job? And then as we've already seen, you would go into that project to see more detail here. Same thing with your change orders. We're going to be able to see that added up. So love to be able to not only have an easy way to create that estimate, but then some really great things that you can start to do with that information now that you've got it in the system here.
Yeah, something else to note on the company overview page, this is where you can access your estimate templates as well. So if you were looking at finding or putting together an estimate template yourself, or you were looking at maybe importing an estimate template from Excel, that's exactly where you would go to find those and to work on them and tweak them for the future.
Yeah, definitely. So with that, I think we have had, again, some really great questions come in, and a few that I want to really make sure that we're able to address, because I think they'll be beneficial for all of you guys. The first one is coming in from Eric here, who, first of all, Eric, I have to say you're welcome. So Eric mentioned that he thought the estimate template we were using here was beautiful, and I think so too. It's my favorite one. It's my go-to estimate template. It's just kind of a standard 16 division format that kind of takes those categories, breaks them down by division, and that's what I've been working in today. You were right on target in noticing that it was a template. So when we looked at kind of our options for creating a new estimate, and here I think we've maybe already made one, so we'll get rid of that. But when we looked at our options for creating some of those new estimates in Construction Online, one of them was to make from a template, and so this is simply a template that I've loaded into the system. One thing that I'll do is, and so that kind of comes back to, like, you can just import that from an Excel sheet. So I will be sure to send out that Excel file to all of our attendees today so that you guys can have that. If you'd like to import it into your Construction Online accounts, you can go ahead and do that. It definitely cuts down on the work. Kind of my go-to templates are the ones that we see here. And then I have a standard residential template I use often that is not division based. So that can be nice too, especially for some of those residential jobs where maybe we want to present it with less coding for the clients to see. So that'll be up to you guys, but I'll be happy to send that out to everyone after the meeting today. We also had a great question. Come in, I believe. Let's see. Oh, yeah, we've had a great question come in from Warren. I hope you're still with us, Warren. You are asking, again, kind of revisiting how are we going to import from Excel. So that's actually, of course, super easy, and you all will want to know how to do this when you are importing that template I send you guys. So we'll walk through that really quickly. So to import from Excel, we're going to just go to a project that doesn't have an estimate yet. We'll go ahead and choose this import option here. And so you'll notice you'll just choose a file. So really the only requirement is that you'll need to have the estimate template just saved to, usually your desktop or a local file there. So you'll just browse for the file. So again, we'll send those over. You guys can import those right in. If you don't want to use one of my templates that I send out, or maybe you're trying to really format an estimate that you're already have in place for an import, kind of preparing that, the best thing to do is use this download template option. It'll just download an Excel file, and what that will do is go ahead and download a file with the format that we're going to need to pull that in. So we'll see it's just kind of a template file that'll show you how you should structure your data with the different columns that you'll need, how to put in your categories and subcategories, how to make sure you start up a new category. So you'll just follow the notes and instructions here. There's a great set of instructions that'll show you exactly what you need to do. And then once you've got your information in this format, you'll kind of go through the steps we just looked at there, where we'll just browse for that file, import it right in, and you'll be good to go. Let's see, just reading through some of these other questions. And of course, as always, my colleague Sydney has been standing by doing a great job of answering these questions for you guys as we go along. Let's see.
Really interesting question came in. Do the overhead and profit margin amounts also use the allowance amounts for the overhead and profit totals? Yes, it does. So if you enter in an allowance amount, if you enter in an amount for an allowance for a client selection, that amount is considered and included as part of the original estimated amount, which means it's going to pull into the overhead and margin section as well. Something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. So many great questions, by the way, scrolling through for you guys. Let's see. Let's wrap up with one more. We did have a question coming in from Carla a bit earlier. Nope, sorry, that's not Carla. That's Kayla. Sorry about that, Kayla. A great question coming in to kind of ask really, who is this estimating platform? Who is that appropriate for? Is that really only appropriate for the general contractor? Could a subcontractor or specialty person really take advantage of this, residential, commercial? And so that's a really great question, because a lot of that is going to, of course, depend on the template that you're using. That 16 division template that I used has a lot of detail, some of which might really work well for a GC or a sub or specialty who's doing really large jobs. If you're doing smaller types of jobs or different types of things, you definitely would want to start with an estimate template that aligned with the type of work that you do. But having said that, I'm so proud to say that when I think about the client base of Construction Online, like Jordan had said earlier, we're helping over 550,000 people all over the world across all different types of projects and companies with these tools. So it's definitely appropriate if you are a general contractor. We certainly have a lot of great tools that are going to work well, but also maybe if you are a subcontractor, or if you are a specialty contractor and you really need that way to manage your projects and estimate accurately, whether you're doing that as again, specialty or sub or residential, commercial. The great thing about Construction Online is that it's flexible enough to work for all of you, but also kind of structured enough to allow you to build in those best practices that are going to be universal for estimates and projects, no matter what type of project it is. We always want that accuracy. We always want that tracking. So definitely, great question there, Kayla.
Absolutely. She might have been thrown off a bit because we were showing the full 16 division template. A lot of the specialty subcontractors that I've worked with will start with that as a base, actually, and then cut out all of the other divisions that they don't really touch. It's been really useful for those companies to take that approach because, well, like we said earlier, there's not really one standard, but there kind of is a standard way of communicating this information, and it's worked out really well for them. You were right. The ability for the estimate to flex and show only the pieces that you need to be concerned with is huge. You're not locked into someone else's idea of what your estimate should look like. Really you get to decide exactly what it looks like, and that is an element of freedom that sometimes can be a little, I don't want to say overwhelming at first, but when you go from a system that is restrictive and tells you how things should be to a system that lets you customize your estimates to the work that you do, sometimes it can be really exciting. I'll put it that way. And I'll tell you, Holly, I'm really excited to see a couple of people are asking for the estimate templates, and I think that they're really, really going to be able to jump right in once they import that template in. It's exciting for sure.
Yeah, that's right. And just to confirm, I know a couple of you asked to confirm, I will be sending that out to everyone. So as soon as we wrap up the webinar today, as soon as I have the video, so we've done a recording, we'll go ahead and send out the recording to everyone, along with a couple of great templates that you guys can use, personalize, get out there and get to hopefully estimating even more in Construction Online. We do have some additional lunch and learn sessions coming up over the next several weeks. So for those of you guys that have been tuning in just before we wrap up today, we'll be doing this same type of workshop every other Wednesday. The next session is going to be Wednesday, April 17th. We're going to focus on quality assurance and audits in Construction Online, so how you can really leverage Construction Online as a platform to help manage the quality assurance of your projects, make sure that that's coming in how you want. We'll also, 2 weeks after that, as we step into May, have a session where we'll really focus on the sales team. So we'll do a lunch and learn May 1st that'll focus on leads and opportunities and really that entire sales management section. And then we'll also, a couple of weeks after that, mid-May, step into the RFI and submittal tracking, how to use some of those advanced communication tools in Construction Online. So definitely hope to see all of you at some of our future sessions. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and investing some time in your business with us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.